Hey, welcome to the open hour. It's cool to see you on Key Music and Andrew. Right on. We are going to kind of talk through anything you want to, really. I've had some questions that have come up in the last few days that I can speak to, but as always, I'm going to um, prioritize the chat here. So if there's anything you want to talk through, I am all about it. We can. I can answer any questions. We can just geek out about music theory. I don't necessarily have a planned presentation with these open hours. If you're new to the open hour, it's really just to talk about what you want to or to address questions that come up. So with that said, I'm going to keep my eye on the chat and, like I say, prioritize any questions that come up there. Otherwise, I'm going to be working on part 5 of the course, making headway. Sometimes it's like the process of writing these lessons and putting them together. Sometimes it's like like in the old West when they were putting in the train system, like in California. I remember seeing like some documentary about this, and it was like, they would be making great headway. They're blasting through sandstone, and it's like easy stuff, and then they would hit some wall that's just a granite wall. And granite is much more condensed. It's harder to like break through, bust through than sandstone. And so I've been hitting sandstone. I've been hitting some granite. It's been a blast, pardon the pun, the composition process. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to be working on. If there aren't any active questions or comments or just chat going on, I'll just put my head down and jump into the part 5 lesson I'm on. So with that said, I'm going to speak to, without any questions coming up at the moment, some questions that have come up elsewhere. And let me jump into that. So let's see. Move my coffee here. And this one, if you can see. Okay, so Tom Sison or Sisson, if I'm saying your name right. I don't know if you're on, Tom, but this was a comment on the most recent live stream on YouTube, which was about the hidden patterns in harmony, geeking out about They Might Be Giants, Birdhouse in Your Soul intro. In that video, I mentioned the different layers in a song, and so Tom said it's easy to see that the soundtrack or the sound stack of rhythm, harmony, melody, and lyrics. That rhythm means the percussion, such as drums or piano. Yes, piano is a percussion instrument, actually, which is true. But does rhythm also include bass guitar, or is bass guitar more a part of the harmony? Which is a really great question. So this is the image that Tom is referring to here. And I know it's part 4. I think it might be lesson 15. It has this diagram. I mean, we talk about this in detail in terms of, at least in the context of guitar, but that's a great question that Tom has about, where does bass fit in to the whole mix? And in a way, I mean, I've definitely, siloed out. I have to look at this pen because it's like still not working. Let me see if it's just. All right, so I think it's the pen for whatever reason. Okay, so I'm going to use my finger. So we've got the different layers of rhythm, harmony, melody, and lyrics. And so, I describe percussion as rhythm, even though really rhythm, every layer is imbued with rhythm. Like it shows up in all of these, rhythm shows up in all of these different layers because you have rhythm of the melody or even rhythm of the lyrics, the cadence of the words within the lyrics, and then harmony, with the chord progression and the rhythm there. So as far as the bass goes, the bass is a bit of, to your point here, Key Music, bass guitar is melody, and a bit of rhythm. It reminds me of how Paul McCartney described his role in the Beatles. So he's, the bass player in the Beatles. And originally, Paul McCartney didn't want to play bass. He wasn't even the bass player. Stu Sutcliffe, in the early days of the Beatles, like back in Hamburg, Germany, Stu Sutcliffe was the bass player. And according to all of the Beatles, he was a cool guy. He looked cool, but he sucked on the bass and eventually left the band. But Paul McCartney didn't want to play bass. As he described it, it was always kind of like the chubby guy in the band who stood at the back of the stage and just was relegated to the leftovers of all the other instruments, is how he described it. But he said, Paul McCartney said that he realized that at some point, once he took on the bass, that it was kind of the pivotal linchpin position within the group, because it was that glue. It did combine, to your point, Keen Music, about it was like it was the musical liaison with the drummer in a way, in that it was kind of part of the rhythm section, in that, you know, a really good drummer and bass player are kind of like Siamese twins in a way, or conjoined twins, in the sense that they are connected at the hip. Like the two parts are integral to each other. The drums, however, aren't tuned. There isn't any musical aspect to that. Pardon me. It's more just purely percussion and rhythm, whereas bass is kind of like I say, it's that missing link that connects that with the chord progression, with the melody, with lead guitar. And so the bass is kind of writing that writing in between. It's got elements of rhythm and even harmony, you know, because the bass is, especially like some of these walking bass lines, it has a melodic quality to it, but you're also like hitting, you know, certain bass that, like a lot of times you're playing arpeggiated chords or moving. That was a C minor chord, C, E flat, and G. You're kind of hitting the notes of the harmony, but there's a melodic component because, you know, it's also kind of like a mix between the chords and the scales, and there's a rhythmic aspect to it. And that is why Paul McCartney was like, oh, wow, like I kind of fell into this position within the band, thinking that it was the throwaway instrument, when really it is a pivotal piece. Pivotal implies movement that way, but really it's more of like the linchpin piece that connects it together. So yeah, it kind of straddles multiple layers in that way, and really all of the instruments straddle the layers, except for maybe like the lyrics. I mean, the lyrics are by definition vocalized with the human vocal cords. So, you know, and we talk about this in more detail elsewhere, but these two layers, if this was a sandwich, you know, you've got the rhythm bun on the bottom, you have the lyrics bun on the top. The actual meat of the music, or the main stuff to really sink your teeth into, are the melody and the harmony. When it comes to music theory, this is kind of the main realm of music theory, are those patterns and principles of the geometry of music, melody and harmony. And like I say, in the course, we get into how those are really just, they stem from the same source. Melody and harmony in a given song, they stem from the same scale or mode. And it all ties together. It's beautiful how music is that way. So yes, hopefully that kind of answers the question. And as always, I love using the Beatles as an example because I love them, and they're great. So another question that came up is, okay, so this was a comment on a video about major scales on the guitar. And the question is, I can't see the whole step and half step structure on the guitar. Is the bottom string in your diagram the low E? So the diagram, so let's kind of zoom in on a diagram similar to what is in that video. And we have squares and circles, which, you know, this is a question that often comes up, which is, hey, what's up with the squares and circles? You know, the color illustrates harmonic relationships between the notes, but why have these extra shape symbols involved? And it's because they highlight the whole steps and half steps, but more than that, as I'll show you in a sec. So a lot of times on the guitar, you know, guitarists will count frets. There's a lot of counting going on, or just, so, you know, this is an open string. So the answer to the second question is yes, this is the low E. So in the diagram, oh, my pen doesn't work. This is the low E. So the numbers here just represent scale degrees within the key of C, was where this illustration came from. But this is a low E, then the first fret is F, second fret is F sharp, third fret is G, fourth fret is G sharp or A flat, fifth fret is A, and so on. So, and even on the guitar, I don't know that you can see this, but you would have it on your guitar too, or something like it. There are like little dots that represent, here we go. Let's use this camera. I don't know if it's going to be clean enough. You have these dots. It's not really showing up, but you know what I'm talking about on the guitar. It's like, it's little guides, it's little visual guides, almost like Braille or little breadcrumbs to be like, okay, this is where you are. Here's the context to keep your bearings as you play. But there's a lot more than just counting frets. Like there's actual harmonic relationships and patterns going on the fretboard. So that's why these patterns, at first it looks like psychedelic circuitry, but it's basically the language of music manifest visually. And so looking at this diagram, we have whole steps and half steps, and those are at the atomic level the most important elements of music. Intervals, whole steps and half steps, and then from whole steps and half steps we come up with all sorts of patterns like major scales, chords, progressions, and so on. They just all build on these intervals. And so the squares in essence are all separated by whole step intervals, and then all of the oh yeah, oh, I see what you're saying. So all of the squares are separated by whole step intervals, and then all of the circles are also separated by whole step intervals. And because my iPad pen is not working, I could try to troubleshoot it right now, but it's there we go. They also are separated by whole steps and half steps. So in essence, that's what the shapes are showing. And so let me undo these lines a little bit and show that while at the atomic level, whole steps and half steps are like the most basic elements of patterns, the cool thing about these whole steps and half steps is they actually reveal a deeper geometry. It's not just counting whole steps and half steps, which is at least one step further than just counting frets. At least you're understanding the component intervals of a pattern. But then looking at those intervals even further, and as the colors and shapes highlight even more, you have this geometry, this symmetry that's going on between notes that really is, the fretboard is like a chessboard in that, you know, like on a chessboard, you have the alternating black and white, which is basically what is going on here with the squares and circles. There's this relationship, or this layout, I should say, this framework that you're working with for movement of, in chess, the different chess pieces. But the cool thing about music is that it's like a chessboard on steroids, in that it's more than just moving separate pieces, this checkerboard pattern of black and white. The pieces are actually baked into the fretboard in the sense of music, in that these relationships, instead of having a knight, for example, versus a rook on a chessboard where it's like they're separate pieces, in music they're like baked into the pattern, these different relationships. And by relationships I mean different geometric patterns that show up on the fretboard that you can dissect. And then just like with chess, where you would, if you're new to chess, it helps to like break it down in layers. So my brother-in-law, the first time I really played chess, he explained it to me. He was like, he was experienced in chess, and he said, I was like trying to like reconcile and overlay all of these different moves in my head all at the same time. So I'm like, okay, so a knight can move like in an L shape in different angles, and a queen can move in any direction, and a rook, you know, can move horizontally. And I was like trying to like make sense of all of these different moves all at the same time. He's like, well, just to start, let's just remove all of the other pieces and let's just have my knight against your knight. So I just practiced just that move of just an L-shaped move, which was so helpful. I was like, oh, okay. I'm like making it more, he's made it more digestible for me. And then he's like, okay, now let's take 2 rooks. I've got my rook, you've got your rook, and let's just practice that move, almost like transparent overlays of information, taking them one slice at a time, one layer at a time. And then he's like, okay, now let's mix it up and let's have my rook against your knight. So now you're anticipating how my piece is going to move. You're moving in your way, and you can see how these 2 overlays, you know, overlay, these 2 transparencies overlay. And so the same idea applies with music, where you have these different geometric patterns within a given key. And I got this lesson, or this image, from lesson 4, I want to say, in the course. And so this is just like one key. We're just looking at the key of C, but all of these apply to every key. And then all of these keys share the same space, which is amazing. So it's like, it's basic. And I get into this in lesson 16 even more, about how it's like kind of mind-blowing, but also very accessible and understandable, how all of these patterns overlay and share the same harmonic space, which is amazing. And I know this is like way beyond just the question of whole steps and half steps, but that's the right question to ask in terms of, okay, how do I visualize these patterns? Because music is intervals, and whole steps and half steps at the atomic level are the base component parts. But then from there, from whole steps and half steps, you can then start to make sense of all sorts of patterns, which is in essence what music is. Music is patterns. And so to see them is music theory by definition, to see sound. And the shapes are as integral to understanding that as the colors, because the shapes, like I say, highlight those interval patterns just as much as the colors. So yes, so in short, this is the low E in the diagram. And the reason that I have this shown like this, a lot of times most people are right-handed, and most people that I've seen like online teaching guitar hold it like this, but then the camera is just like this, like you're seeing right here, where you're looking at it like you have to flip the pattern in your head and picture that you're me. And so just showing it like this isn't like putting myself in your shoes, or you putting yourself in my shoes from my perspective, looking at the guitar as it is. So if I hold the guitar and I'm looking at it myself like this, that's in essence what this pattern is you're holding the guitar. It's looking at it from your perspective as the player, holding the instrument in your hands, kind of tilting it up, assuming that you're right-handed, and holding it that way. That's why this note is the low E, because low is actually closer to you when you look at it like that. Does that make sense? And the fact that I've had comments from people saying, oh, that's, you know, kind of hard to wrap my head around to see it from that perspective, is just because most people online don't, I guess, have the empathy to show it from your perspective. Hey, William, cool to have you on. Thank you for being here. So just joined. I'm assuming that this is the music theory course, but which lesson and page number is visible now on screen so I can reference it? That is a good question. I don't have the specific page that it comes from, but this is from lesson 4. And so lesson 4 is, can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Notes and Intervals or something like that. But it's basically the last lesson in part 1, fundamentals. And so there are lessons 1, 2, and 3 all lead up to lesson 4. And lesson 4, it starts getting pretty cool in lesson 4, because you start seeing this geometry on the fretboard. And I'll say that lesson 5, it's very tempting to jump into part 2 chords because it's called chords. And this is what I did, and this is what a lot of musicians do when they first get into an instrument, is they want to cut to the chase and go straight to chords, because chords are like a base ingredient in songwriting. Harmonies, chord progressions, it's so satisfying, and a lot of material online like just shows chords, like they just start with chords. And so it can seem like getting into the fundamentals, the basics of music theory, could be arguably boring, or like, I don't need to know that kind of stuff, when really part 1 is where it's like, that is the foundation upon which everything builds. So anyway, all that to say, definitely check out lessons 1, 2, and 3 before lesson 4, and then just go through them in order because they're laid out that way. Lesson 4, thanks. It's called scale degrees. Okay, cool. Thank you for confirming. And like I say, lesson 16 in part 5 is like lesson 4 on steroids, basically. I'm really excited to get part 5 out. I'm currently composing, wrapping up the composition of lesson 18. And whereas I was publishing each lesson right as it was done, what I'm doing on part 5 is, because everything is so intertwined. I found that as I'm going through working on lesson 18, I'm like, oh, okay, there's something in lesson 16 I need to kind of tweak a little bit. And so they're all kind of like being created and composed together at the same time. So that's why I'm going to post them once they're all done. Thanks for the advice regarding going through it in order. Yes, definitely check it out in sequence. I start with lesson 0 because in a lot of books, there's the preface, which I am tempted to skip myself because I'm like, who needs a preface? I don't need the context of the story. I just want to jump into the story. And so I included lesson 0 and didn't call it the preface because it's easy, at least in my mind, to dismiss something like that and skip over it. But lesson 0 does lay the foundation of why music theory in the first place, to really get at what's the point, why even care about music theory. And so just kind of putting that into words so that it's out there. So this is the fretboard. It is like a chessboard, but an awesome chessboard, and one that, like you would never learn chess just for the gee whiz file of, okay, I know how to play chess. Like, you learn the game to play the game. And so that's what music theory is about, is you learn theory to put it into practice, to actually create in the form of songwriting. So that's kind of what I get at in lesson 0, but don't skip it because it's good for context. Okay, so the next question, which I may have erased. Did I? Or it's just not showing up? There it is. Okay. So a question here on how to play guitar chords using scales. So this is a video that I have that talks about a lot of times, guitarists focus on scales to practice scales. But scales are much more useful and have more of an application than just scales or the source of solos. Like I say, we get into this in the course, but like, scales are also the foundation of melodies, the foundation of solos on the guitar, but they're also the foundation of chords, and they're really what inform how chords work together in a key to form harmonic progressions, song sections, and entire songs. So scales are very powerful, and so that's what I talk about in this video. And so the question here is, how do you memorize and internalize all of this information? Is there any workbook that you would suggest? And it's a workbook on, this is the 3rd time I've used the phrase on steroids, in the sense of the course being that workbook, but it's like thousands and thousands of diagrams, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and getting into how music theory works in order with no assumption of prior knowledge. So the answer is definitely check out the music theory course, because it's a workbook and then some, and then some, and then some on top of that. I'm working on, like I say, part 5, where I said thousands and thousands of diagrams, but just for the diagrams in lesson 17, which is about chord inversions, it's going to be thousands of diagrams just for that, because I'm including there. I'm talking about the different chords, inversions, chord extensions, and how all of this theory applies and appears on the guitar fretboard in every key. And in the chord books that will accompany the lesson 17, they're not going to be in lesson 17, but they are supplements to lesson 17, and actually supplements to lessons 18 and 19 and beyond. Those chord books will have thousands of chord diagrams. That's one thing, though, that I have never loved about music instructors is they talk about, or they, present chord dictionaries as all of these. It's like this huge compendium of chord diagrams, and it's almost like shock and awe, where they're trying to like overwhelm you. Like the guitar grimoire books are like that, where grimoire is a medieval term. I think they even define it on the front of the book, saying grimoire is like a medieval term for book of mysteries or something. And it's like, I don't know. I think presenting something as mysterious or esoteric isn't like that friendly, because it's trying to say like, are you on the level? Like, can you understand? Or it's like, no, this is accessible. Let's talk about it. These are patterns that we all can understand. And so when I say that the chord books are going to have thousands and thousands of diagrams, it's not because it's like, oh, wow, how amazing is that? It's more like useful resources. There's a lot of stuff there. They're all understandable. They're all based on the logic and patterns of music. But it is also a lot to create. So that's why it's taking a minute to put together. And since all chords and inversions apply to all 12 keys, that's where the number comes from, is because there's so many permutations across 12 keys. William, please dismiss this question if it breaks the flow of this lesson. That's cool. No, that's perfect. We're just speaking to whatever comes up. But my ChordMap just arrived, and the 2 layers of plastic stick together. This is perfect timing, because I actually was going to speak to this, and hard to turn independently. What is the solution? So thank you for bringing that up, and I'm glad that the ChordMap made it. So I have had a similar thing with my ChordMap, but there is, this is what you do. So I don't have that now with my ChordMap, because I've worked out how to play with it. But one thing that is tempting to do, and so I'm not saying you're doing this, but it could be a factor and can help in getting a feel for it, is that it's like when I first was doing it, like I was pressing down, I was showing this to someone, and where they were like, hey, I can't move it. Like if I push hard, it feels like, so this is, you can see the white of my knuckle, like I'm pushing it hard, and it's like definitely not working. So I'm actually lifting off on the friction and barely touching it, and it actually is moving more easily. Now you might still have some stick in that case. So what you can do is for example, I pinch this just barely, and I'm getting a little bit of a lift where the transparency is coming off. Now I'm not like bending it at a hard right angle, because I don't want to crease the plastic. But here, like I'm kind of like pulling at it a little bit, just kind of tugging it. I'm like rotating it and tugging it a bit firmly to kind of loosen it around the base, which is holding it in place right there. That kind of helps to loosen it a bit. And then sometimes it's a little bit of static cling. So it's like the cling actually is just like a static buildup, static electricity that's building up between the layers. So if you kind of like fold it up and just release that static cling by just kind of like letting the air, like letting the, I don't know how static electricity works. I'm not a physicist, but it kind of like dissipates and it releases some of that static cling. Now the static cling might build up a little bit after they rotate in relation to each other. And so just by kind of like releasing the static cling helps a bit, but also just the maybe ease off on the pressure on each layer. So I'm not pushing down, not white knuckling the movement with either hand, and it moves a little more easily. Also, what you can do is you can push this a little bit so that I'm pushing the bottom end, so it's kind of like lifting up on this side a little bit, so that it's not, so this isn't pushing down and putting a lot of pressure on the layers, the transparencies at the middle, and that kind of helps to loosen up any tension that builds there. So in summary, 3 things that can help: less pressure with your actual rotating thumbs or fingers, releasing the static cling on each layer. I could do that on the lower layer and the upper layer, and then also maybe just try loosening up the pressure there. If you need to adjust this screw to kind of loosen it, if it's a little bit tight, that might kind of make them tighter friction. So if you loosen that screw just a little bit, it might ease up some of the friction at that center point. And also just with rotation and with use, it you start to get smoother motion. Like the static cling, I've found dissipates. It might also be because I've had a little bit of, frankly, a little bit of dust settle in there. The dust might almost be kind of like cornmeal when you're baking pizza, for lack of a better comparison. That it kind of like, it removes that texture or touching sensation between the pizza dough and the pan. It's almost like a little bit of dust has helped kind of like make it a smoother motion, if that makes sense. So that hopefully helps, and giving it some time and some rotation and releasing that static cling should help. So yeah, I'm glad it arrived, and I'm so excited for you to jump in and to be using the ChordMap. William, you said those hints all helped. Thanks. Should get an anti-static cloth and rub it between layers. Oh, that's not a bad idea either. In fact, this I don't know, is this microfiber? I don't know if this is anti-static or pro-static. I actually don't know. I don't know what it'll do. But maybe check that out, because I have not tried an anti-static cloth, but that could definitely help. And like I say, speaking of part 5, definitely check out, if you're starting in part 1, it's going to be tempting to jump into part 5. At least it would be for me, because I'm really excited about part 5. It is about improvisation, where we're getting into really dissecting the guitar fretboard, like at a level that I hadn't done before. So really laying that out, and then getting into chords, inversions, chord extensions, and then getting into modes, and then the circle of fifths and modal mixture and borrowed chords and chord progressions, and then beyond. Part 5 is going to be awesome. It is awesome, but when it's published, it's going to be especially awesome, which is coming out in the next couple of months. And with part 5, like everything else, every lesson builds on the previous ones. So don't cut to the chase. don't skip anything leading up to lesson 5, or part 5, because it could be confusing. Be like, wait a sec, we're talking about patterns or principles that aren't covered. They are covered, but just in the previous part. Part 1, fundamentals, is foundational, hence the name fundamentals. Part 2, chords, gets into chords and chord progressions and how harmonic flow works within songs. Part 3, time, is about time, so it's more abstract. And we're getting into, in part 3, it gets into music notation, dismantling and debunking traditional notation, so you can transcend it, get past the mental blocks that might be there, because it is the de facto method and has been for the last 1,000 years. And then part 4, composition, starts to construct again. Instead of deconstructing something like traditional notation, we're starting to construct songs with the different layers, like we looked at earlier, with rhythm and harmony and melody and lyrics. And then part 5 builds from there into improvisation. So once you have your bearings and have these principles under your belt, then it's the sky's the limit from there. And that's what part 5 is about. Yeah. So those are the questions that I had that I was going to address that had come up previously. I'm happy. Those are great questions, William. And we can talk through anything you want. Without any planned presentation, that I could just plug away on stuff here. Otherwise, I'm totally up for nerding out on anything when it comes to music theory, or all of the ancillary subjects, which is basically everything. Music seems to touch on or be influenced by everything, which I found. Speaking of that, that's the beauty of music, is that it's essentially a language, and but it's a language that is unlike any other. It's not like a human language. It is, and I used to hear people say that, oh, music is a language, and I was like, oh, okay, that's a poetic description, but it actually is in the way that it works, in the way that the components are structured. And I get into that. This is the theme of part 5, which is why it's top of mind. But it's a beautiful thing, and it's influenced by everything, like all of the silos that we have in life. Different perspectives on things, biology, or astronomy, or physics. Like, it's all just different perspectives on what's essentially the same thing. And so to be able to understand music actually provides, I think, insights into all walks, all sorts of things. William, I just looked at Amazon. Let's see. I just looked, and Amazon sells anti-static cloths. Not all microfiber cleaning cloths are necessarily anti-static. That's a good point. And that's why I hesitated to rub this on my ChordMap, because like, oh man, I might build up some static cling. So that's good to know. Thank you for clarifying. And I will double check that what I have is either anti-static, or I need to check that out myself too, to see if that is a factor. I haven't had cling or the sticking issue with my ChordMap, so I haven't like explored it in earnest, just personally. But that'll help. Oh, I think 1/4 tip, just to summarize, which I did mention, but I didn't mention it in my summary of tips, was just to kind of like tug at. Basically, I'm like tugging in around the circle, kind of rotating and tugging as I go, to kind of like loosen in case there's any friction around the middle post there. So I'm just trying to like those exploded diagrams of anatomy or whatever. It's like I'm just trying to like have release friction or tension at every point, whether it's around the middle post, whether it's between layers, whether it's like touching this to that, all of that. So that's what I have found works. And this ChordMap, like I talk about this ChordMap and use it in have used it in some like live streams, and I have some posts in the library on this, but it is lesson 19 is really where it's going to be explained, formally explained, or like in sequence within the context of the course. And there's a lot that goes into it, but it's the beauty is that it's also so elegant how music works. The fact that all of these modes are, and William, have you seen the post? I have there's a post in the start page of mycolormusic.com that explains like the basic structure of how relative modes work and parallel modes, and when you rotate these layers, what they show. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out. It's kind of like a quick start guide to the ChordMap. And then some of the videos that I've used it to explain songs also helps. But then also lesson 19 is going to expound on those in more detail, those ideas, and how to really navigate it. But in the meantime, you can definitely jump in, and I'm excited for you to play with this, because that's what it's about. It's playing music. It's not working music. It's playing music, and it's definitely a game. But like any game, games aren't fun if you don't know how to play them. But once you know how to play it, that's why it's called a game. It's fun stuff. All right, so I'll keep my eyes peeled for any comments if you want to chat about anything else. Otherwise, what I'm doing actually is okay, cool. So William, I did watch a video on relative parallel, which I think was the quick start guide. Okay, cool. I liked the analysis of the Beatles and Paul Simon. Okay, yeah, that's the video. Songs especially, and want to watch more of those. Okay, cool. That's good feedback. Thank you for that's something more that you want to see. I have some of the earlier videos that I did. I have, like on YouTube, there's a song insight playlist where I've used different songs, and even in some of the modes videos that I posted, which was more like using the piano to break down some modes. I'm going to be doing more modes videos as well, especially as I've been fleshing out and putting more of a sequence to these ideas in lesson 18. There will be videos that accompany that, and lots of diagrams and lots of library posts that accompany that. My library posting has been recently the lightest that it's ever been, just because all of my juice is going into just completing the course, which thank you to all supporters, because you're making this possible to here on Locals. Your support here makes, and I'm getting things in the shop, like it makes it possible to complete the course at the speed that I'm doing. The first parts 1, 2, and 3 took years, and much of that work I did before I was online and posting stuff and doing all of that. And so now that I'm doing live streams and online, I am also completing the course, which is like, for me, I've never spun multiple plates like this at the same time at such a speed. And so it's been an interesting process. It is an interesting process because it's current. But once the course is complete, I'm really excited to jump in and be creating more videos, more like produced videos, as well as more live streams, more shorts, and all of that, that just pick apart all of these different aspects. And anyway, all that to say, the song insights that I have posted so far, and also the mode videos using some songs that are like mini song insights, but focused on a specific mode, Lydian, Phrygian, Dorian, all of that. My approach to showing the chord progressions and showing the relationships between chords was a little less elegant, in that I was using a table of Roman numerals that was, here I am. It was a table of Roman numerals that was organized by relative mode, which is insightful, but even more so, like seeing these relationships is even more insightful with the chord map. And so I'm excited to your point, William, to be creating more videos and song insights and breaking apart progressions using this, because it's like picking apart songs it's almost like cutting a knife through butter. Like, it's so smooth and just like, oh wow, like at a level and pace of song insight that I'd never experienced personally. And the way this started for me all in the beginning was trying to understand the Beatles song catalog. Like, how did they compose their progressions? What was the how do they evolve? Like, how are they so good? Because people say Beatles are the masters of harmony, and by that they mean their chord progressions. Like, everything, their melodies, lyrics, all of it is great, but like the chord progressions are really, really good. And so I want to understand how that worked, but without having the mental tools or the literal tools to like really wrap my head around all of it. It was slow going, to say the least, and friction filled and frustrating. But now looking at songs and seeing, oh wow, that included modal mixture, or that was a borrowed chord from over here, is just like, whoa. It helps streamline the process of and lowers the learning curve. Like for me, I always wanted to know how other people wrote their songs so I could like create my own. But much of the time, like I just found that I was like, and I've used this metaphor before, this illusion before, but it was like climbing the stairway to heaven, but never reaching my own heaven. Like I was just on this treadmill of Led Zeppelin, or just like always just endlessly playing other people's stuff, parroting other musicians' music, and never digesting and internalizing and creating my own stuff based on those principles, because I never really understood how their songs worked. And so, we all start, by covering other artists, which is awesome, and it's wonderful because there's a lot of good music out there. But if we're all honest about it, that's never really our ultimate aim. Like for me personally, I know I picked up a guitar because I wanted to create my own music, but in order to kind of cut my teeth and get a feel for it, I had to like learn other musicians' music, which I love, but I didn't want to stop there. And without music theory, without really understanding and internalizing how this language works and what goes into songwriting, I was just stuck playing other people's stuff, which was frustrating. So to be able to like dissect other songs and then use those ideas as the building blocks to spur you on to your own creation is what it's all about. And I'm excited to be jumping more into that. Like I say, once part 5 is complete, and I'm not putting 98% of my mental energy towards completing the course. So it's going to be fun. Paul Simon is awesome. I don't know. Do you have, William, any favorites, any artists or bands or influences that are like speak to you? I mean, I know I use the Beatles and people like Paul Simon. Bridge Over Troubled Water is like one of the best albums ever. Like if there are musicians that would be interesting ones to cover, I should say, with these song insights. William, you said, I'm new to guitar in the circle of fifths, but know enough to see the profound value of understanding modal interchanges and borrowed chords done correctly. So I'd love more song insight videos on that. Awesome. Like that's excellent feedback to get. So that's cool. So that's cool. Is the guitar your first instrument, or have you played other stuff before? It's always interesting to me to know kind of where people are coming from. That was a comment I saw somewhere. Someone posted recently, just commented on a video I'd posted about saying that the guitar is like the worst instrument to learn music theory. I was like, I mean, I never really respond to comments, positive or negative, online, because one, a lot of times I don't see them, and because I'm so focused on these materials. But if I do see something, sometimes it kind of catches my eye, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting comment, saying, for example, that the guitar is the worst instrument to learn music theory. And I can see how, like, I get the basic idea, which is like on a piano, you have, it's just, just a line of notes. It's one dimension, or it's one plane, instead of having like, you just have an x-axis instead of also a y-axis, or z-axis for that matter, in 3 dimensions. So I guess maybe the implied meaning of that comment was that the piano is more conducive to wrapping your head around all of these patterns. But I don't know if that's true, especially as I'm getting into part 5. Well, it really is. You just go through the music theory course. Hopefully you can see that the guitar is not so daunting of an instrument. But there's something really cool about the fact that you do have a y-axis, or you have stacked lines, because basically it's just like one big chunky guitar string, in that it's just all of these notes are frets. And so if you stack those strings into a guitar, you have this matrix of notes that actually reveals patterns like we were looking at earlier, that could be even more insightful than anything. So the guitar is not only not a terrible instrument to learn music theory, it might be the ideal instrument to learn music theory. Okay, so William, you said yes, first instrument. That's awesome. 2 years, and in 2 years in, as a 70-year-old in the old farts club, and it's still going, slow going, but I love it. That's awesome. Sadly, great air guitar too. Yeah, I can I have some sweet air guitar skills too. That's awesome. We could have like a guitar off with the air guitar. That's really cool. And 2 years in, yeah, like my experience when I picked up a guitar is I heard the Beatles. It was probably after hearing Sgt. Pepper for the first time. So I was like, man, that's a really good album. I want to write my own music. And so talk about an expectation of like, this is going to be amazing. After hearing the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, for me, that's quite the leap of never having created anything to that being the inspiration. But I had like all of these ideas in my head. I can hear songs in my head. And so I got my guitar and I was like, I just want to like have this music flow out of me. And I was like, what should I do? It's almost like having a typewriter. You have this story in your head and you're like, you sit down at a typewriter, but there's no letters on the keys. It's just this uniform blank keyboard with the manufacturer wasn't throwing you a bone. They weren't giving you any tips on how to actually make sense or where to press your fingers. That's basically what instruments are. Whether it's a piano or a guitar or a ukulele, a banjo, anything, like these manufacturers have the gall to create instruments, sell them at amazing prices and margins for them. But then they're like, oh, you can figure it out. And it's like, what are you supposed to do with that? Like that is maddening. And so that was my experience when I was holding a guitar in my hands. It was like holding a typewriter without any instruction that went with it. And it was just like, oh, like having that all of those ideas flowing, for lack of a better phrase, it was like the extreme case of constipation, where it was just like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, I can't get these ideas out of me. Pardon the graphic metaphor there. But like the idea is that, you know, if you can make sense of an instrument and actually become fluent in getting those ideas out of you, that is what it's all about. Even if it's playing other people's music, which is awesome. Songwriting is just an extension of that. It's just using those patterns that other people used to, you know, assemble your own meaning and message in the form of chords and progressions and melodies. So that's awesome. I love that you're 2 years in and going for it. And I'm excited because the learning curve should definitely be lower as you go through the course. Andrew, cool to have you on. Thanks for joining. Do you have a bio section? Interested how long you've been playing guitar, published any of your own music, etc. So I don't have a bio section on any of the sites that I can think of. I don't think I have, but to answer those questions, so I've been playing guitar for coming up on 30 years. So I started, I'm almost 45. And so the first time I picked up, the first instrument I played, I was like 10, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And it was violin. It was just like in grade school, played in the orchestra, but it was just traditional music notation. So it was Greek to me, had no idea what was going on, but at least it was my first instrument. And then I kind of dabbled with piano a little bit, never really took formal lessons. It was very frustrating. I remember one time literally holding the songbook of traditional notation over my head, just slamming it onto the ground. I was probably like 12 or something. And I was so frustrated. And it was that same existential dilemma of I'm naturally fluent in music in my head, but it's a foreign language to me when it comes to trying to understand what all of these arcane symbols mean, all these medieval black and white dots on the page. So that was very frustrating. And then I got into guitar. Actually, first I started with the bass guitar. It wasn't this bass guitar, it was the one before that. But just kind of like playing, with some friends, played in a band, getting a feel for just hearing sounds, playing by ear, and just finding the notes. But it always was so mysterious to me because I was like, okay, this note works with this chord, this string and this fret. But then sometimes like it doesn't work with that other chord. Like I didn't understand that the pattern, that there was a logic to the pattern, that there was this whole circuitry or this framework of harmonic relationships. I had no idea. But I got decently good just by, hunting and pecking for notes and getting a feel for it. Then, started getting into guitar, learning that way, just, looking at chord charts, playing, finger diagrams and contorting my finger in these arbitrary random ways that were never explained. It's just place your finger here, press that note, don't ask any questions, do it. So I did it, but I was still confused. I didn't fully understand. So I would start to play chords and string them together, and they kind of sounded good. But it's like, speaking. If you didn't understand, that this is a noun and this is a verb, and they go together in a grammatically coherent way, I kind of sounded, musically speaking, I kind of sounded like, I didn't know how to talk right, like I didn't know what I was doing. And so my music was a little bit rough. And then as I got into music theory, it was like, understanding that there's a logic to all of this. It's an accessible, understandable, beautiful geometry. And that's how I got into it. As far as publishing my own music, I haven't published my own music. This was actually a question that came up in the last live stream where I basically, the answer is I'm a little bit shy as far as that goes. I'm more of an introvert than anything. And so I've just kind of just created that on the back end. Virtuous Heretic said, Mike is what Sally Hogshead, yeah, that's right, calls a secret weapon. He prefers not to talk about himself. That's very true, Virtuous Heretic. You're totally right. And so, yeah, what I have put out there and love putting out there is more the facilitating your experience in songwriting, though I do love it. It's like, it's a beautiful process. I mean, I've dedicated my life to understanding music theory. I think it's, for me, an existential question and experience that is beyond just music. Like I say, music touches on everything in life. I think it's insightful, more insightful than just, nice sounding ditties. I think it's a profound, beautiful thing. But what I've published is in the realm of music theory. William, you said, do you have recommendations of songs or groups to learn/analyze on your own with your chord map? That's a good question. Pop or blues or rock suggestions, since jazz stuff goes too far over my head. Beatles, yes. Others. Okay, that's a great question. Yeah, just on your comment about jazz. So jazz is very interesting. I would say jazz actually gets into more of the geometry, like the pure geometry of music, than any other genre. And one time I heard a good joke, which is talking about free jazz, is a style of like just, improvisational free jazz, free form jazz. And the joke is, when jazz is free, everyone pays. Because a lot of people think it's a little harsh on the ears. But to your question about songs or artists, so the beautiful thing about music theory is that these principles and patterns apply to all of Western music for sure. And so if there are musicians you're into, you can dive into the chord map and dissect and understand their music, because the vast majority of songs are based on these patterns. For me personally, I love the Beatles. Yes. I do like Paul Simon a lot. he is super interesting and more transparent in his songwriting process than Paul McCartney. Paul Simon versus Paul McCartney. Paul Simon's much more candid about his knowledge of music theory and the fact that it's not this mysterious thing. Actually have posted before about his commentary on Paul McCartney, claiming that he was completely ignorant of theory and basically called bullshit on that. He was like, yeah, no, he knows what he's doing. And knows what he's doing implies that there actually is a method to the madness, that there is a structure and a framework to it, which there is. I mean, for me personally, some of my favorite musicians are, I really like Keane, the band Keane. If you're familiar with them, they're from like the early 2000s, British pop, you might say. I do like early Lenny Kravitz. He's actually really good guitar player too. But honestly, any and all songs. I mean, the blues is really just kind of focuses on the 1-4-5. I mean, not completely, but much of it. It's the 12-bar blues uses that. So the blues may not yield as many interesting chord progressions as maybe other genres, but all genres are basically just different takes on these same underlying themes. That's the beautiful thing about music theory is you could be into country music, you could be into pop music, you could be into emo, or whatever it might be, and we all arrive at basically the same fundamental stuff. Yes, I have to throw this up. So yes, when jazz is free, everyone pays. Jazz music is actually can be really good. There's kind of, it takes some getting used to for some people, or some people just totally love it. So we are at the hour. This has been interesting talking about music theory. I could geek out for hours and hours, and regularly do. And actually, I'm going to be geeking out for hours and hours today, working on lesson 18, wrapping that up, and then working on the illustrations. Lesson 18 modes is, I say this every time, every new lesson I'm working on, but it is really my favorite one, because it's getting super interesting and super empowering in the creation process. So I'm excited to jump into that. So thank you for being on this live stream, this open hour, and we will be talking very soon. I'm going to post the heads up for the live stream this Monday. So we'll geek out then. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.